Pathetic, appalling, lacking in any quality needed to win a game in the Premier League. That's pretty much a lot of the things you could say about United's performance today.
I think they're certainly the words that Manchester United fans would look to describe their performance, because it looked unworthy of a Manchester United team. When you think about Manchester United and the quality that they possess, normally it was nowhere near that level. And you can argue that and say, well, listen, these are not guys who are coming through the ranks, who are inexperienced. That's a squad and a team built through with a lot of money, a lot of investment. But the most concerning thing was how much they were bullied from start to finish. And there's real problems at Manchester United right now.
Yes, you can say there were defensive mistakes. They led to the goals, but there were 2 shots on target in the entire game. There was a problem at the other end of the field as well. There's a problem with energy, with attitude. There was no urgency. Then you never felt like they were desperately chasing the game. It must be a real alarm call for Jose Mourinho and his coaching staff and the supporters when they see how little United seem to give to the game today.
Well, listen, I think straight away Mourinho will probably say, well, you've seen an example of what he's probably seen week in, week out on the training field, a lack of desire, really. And that's the most awful thing to be accused of as a player. But I think you're right. I think defensively, when you think about Jose Mourinho's brilliant teams at Real Madrid, at Chelsea, they were all built, and Inter Milan, on a good defensive structure, reliable players. And they had none of that today. Bailly, who I think is the best centre-half in the club, was way below his standard. Lindelof looks like a player who's come through the ranks. He looks like someone, and I don't mean like a John O'Shea, who had more composure as a young player than him. I mean like a Scott Wotton, a Keane, a young Keane, something like that. He certainly doesn't look like a £30 million player who's come from Benfica. So that's up to the manager. And the stick that you can beat Mourinho with is that he didn't get him in that winter window, and then he went hard for him in the summer. And that made me think, OK, you've identified a centre-half who could probably solve all your problems. But he's been woefully short of that. Add to that then your leader, your captain. It looks like he's trying to cajole a performance and add more discipline to Pogba's game. But he was everything that you think is bad about Pogba's game. Passing was erratic at best. His inability to dominate a midfield area when he had 3 in there with him against Brighton's 2, with Dale Stephens with man of the match, and him and Proper just dominated that area convincingly. United started well for the first 10 minutes. We thought that the 3 in midfield would overpower Brighton, but it didn't turn out that way, and Brighton were comfortable winners. And normally when you're playing against United in these situations, you feel like it's back to the walls for the last 20 minutes, where you think they're going to throw everything at you. It's going to be so hard. I've been in that situation before where I've been leading against United. Invariably, you end up losing by 3-2, 4-2, whatever. I think Shane Duffy will probably look at his defenders and his goalkeeper and think, well, that was far comfortable than I ever thought it would be.
It's Tottenham next for Manchester United at Old Trafford. They'll have watched this performance and thought, like, what an opportunity to go there and win at a ground where they've had a very poor record over the last 20 years. What does Jose Mourinho do? Because it's not like he's got a whole host of guys to come back in. Yes, Nemanja Matic is missing, and he's obviously a key part of this team. Antonio Valencia was missing. That's pretty much it. There was no Alexis Sanchez today, but he hasn't been lighting it up from United either towards the end of last season or against Leicester City in the opening game of this season. So it's this group of players he needs to get a reaction out of, and if he doesn't, it's a terrible reflection on him, isn't it? And suddenly the questions that were being asked in the weeks before the season, how long will we see Jose Mourinho last this season, well, they start to be asked again.
Yeah, I think they will, and I think that's the type of performance that managers lose their job from. I look at the situation in terms of what's happening in the Premier League, and notably what's happening in Manchester with the blue shadow that Pep Guardiola has created. I genuinely believe that Mourinho was the man to take him on, because he's done it before against his iconic Barcelona team with a Real Madrid team. But they had players of far superior quality to Manchester United. The very fact that he's had millions and millions to spend to get a team in his image, and yet I'm looking at that and they're nowhere near what you normally associate with a Jose Mourinho team, in that defensively strong, and then they have that creative players to do something out of nothing and win games comfortably. I think he looks at that. I don't think he likes that team. I don't think he trusts them more than anything. And I think you're looking at that scenario now, 3 years into it now, where you say now they'll play Tottenham, and everyone was talking about Tottenham's lack of investment, but Pochettino's got a squad and a team who know exactly what their manager wants, and they produce it for him more often than not. Their biggest problem, Tottenham, is having the mental strength to go that final distance. But in terms of them going up against that Manchester United team and that performance, they'll brush them aside comfortably.
Right, pretty strong stuff from Dave and Gary Breen. Pathetic, appalling, lacking in any quality. Daniel Harris, good morning to you. How you doing?
I'm well, thanks. You all right, guys?
Pathetic, appalling and lacking in any quality. Is this as bad as it's been under Mourinho?
Yeah, I would say so. It's definitely the worst United performance since the last time they went to Brighton, just before the end of last season. But there was excuses that you could make for it at that time. The cup final was coming up, the league position was secure. But to play like that in the second game of the season tells you that things are not right at all. As I was saying, the defending is almost one thing. You can not accept individual errors from defenders, but if your defenders aren't ready or aren't good enough, then that's what's going to happen. But the total lack of any fire or intensity or cohesion or energy in attack is something that we've seen a lot of under Mourinho. This kind of hanging around, hoping that one of the good players or a few of the good players will do something good. They don't know what they're doing, and that's been a constant since Mourinho took over.
I think it reached its worst point yesterday, Daniel, in the beIN Sports studio when Sam Allardyce was flanked by Dennis Wise and Andy Gray and was pontificating about about Manchester United's performance. Like, that really is the nadir when Sam Allardyce is patronising you as a football manager, isn't it?
Sam Allardyce and Dennis Wise talking to each other is the nadir of humanity of Manchester United. But Sam Allardyce slagging you off is, I guess, a decoration on the cake that you already have. But yeah, United, it's very hard to see where they go from here. In the press conference afterwards, Mourinho was incredibly down. Didn't look like he had the fire to go and do anything about it. He doesn't look really like he knows what the answers are. Sometimes I'm not sure he even knows what the questions are. And yet, it's much more complicated than that. First of all, if you look at what Mourinho has done in the time he's been at United, and you look at the team that he's got, would any other manager have taken United to second place last season with the players that he had? Not necessarily. Took them to the cup final. He also won 2 trophies in the first season, and to win the Europa League, admittedly against rubbish, but still, to win the Europa League with that group of players was a not insignificant achievement. And the problem now is that I think that, and I felt this in the summer, and I felt this last season, that I didn't think any manager would have taken United from where they were to where they are as quickly as Mourinho did. I don't think Mourinho is the man to take United the rest of the way.
But who is?
That's a difficult question because the rest of the way is so far, and City are so far ahead. City have got the most money, and they've got the best manager, and they've got the best players. So to surmount that is like there's probably no one in world football that you could come in and think, well, he will beat Pep Guardiola and the City team to a title. So it's quite hard to make that change. And particularly if you look at United now, and the club is a mess. You've got the Glazers who are taking money out as much to the fullest extent that they can. You've got Ed Woodward, who knows absolutely nothing about football, who's trying to do transfer deals, who's trying to make as much money as he can. And you've got a manager like Mourinho, who they think will get them in the top 4. And we talked about this last week, that if you gave Mourinho all the money in the world, or even any manager all the money in the world, would they be able to buy a team that would win the league? And the answer is probably not. So there's not any particular incentive to fund the team to the extent that it needs to be funded, because it's a punt and a very expensive punt, but that's where United are, and that rock goes back a long time before Mourinho. That goes back to the Rock of Gibraltar row, really, and it's very hard to change that. It's just what happened was that for the first 8 years or whatever it was of the Glazers being in charge at United, Fergie's genius masked more or less what was going on, and the chickens come home to roost now. And they've got a problem, and there's no particularly obvious route to solve it. Like let's say Mourinho says he's had enough, and I think he probably thought about that quite carefully during the summer, and I think that the club probably thought quite carefully about whether they should make it enough. Let's say he goes, who do you get? So the people who are available, you either think, well, Carrick and Warren. Carrick is running the club at the moment. Not running the club, sorry, I'm not talking about Michael Carrick is not running the club. You got Michael Carrick, who's the reserve, who's the coach, wherever he is. So you get Michael Carrick in, or you've got Antonio Conte, Zinedine Zidane, Arsene Wenger. They're available. You can't tell me that you think those guys will come in and make an enormous difference. Or you think, well, you hang on till the end of the season and see if you can get Pochettino. And Pochettino has a club. He loves his players. He obviously has a bond with his players. It's his team. It's his club. So you might be able to get him. You might not be able to get him. So it's quite hard to see what the answer is.
If you read between the lines of what's going on here, it's quite clear that Jose Mourinho is pointing the finger at Ed Woodward and co when he talks about the failings of deadline day, not getting the likes of Rafael Varane or any centre-back indeed. And it's kind of hammered home yesterday when you look at the performance of Eric Bailly and Victor Lindelof, one of the worst defensive performances by a centre-back pairing that Manchester United has seen in quite some time. So you can see why Ed Woodward perhaps doesn't trust Jose Mourinho when it comes to purchasing a centre-back. But for that very reason, Ed Woodward should have pulled the plug on Jose Mourinho a long time ago. So it's very, very hard to know who to blame the most here because they both got it absurdly wrong.
Yeah, there's plenty of blame to go around and no need to be sparing. When Mourinho got the job, it was kind of presented as a fait accompli. And I think I understood that from people who are money men. If you're thinking, I need to make money out of this, then you're thinking, well, who is the person most likely to sustain United operating as an ATM for the Glazers? And I guess that was Mourinho. If you're thinking who is going to take United to win leagues, to me, like Pochettino, and build something, Pochettino seemed a better bet. But I understood why they went for Mourinho. In terms of the defenders, it's difficult because Mourinho at Chelsea had Ricardo Carvalho and John Terry as centre-backs. There aren't, in my opinion, two defenders in world football who are as good as those two. So Mourinho has spent money, bought Lindelof and Bailly, and they both need work. They've both played roughly, I think, 80 top-level games. That's not a lot. And so it's not entirely surprising that when they play and haven't played very much, they make mistakes. So I think that in the summer, Mourinho probably made a decision if he wasn't going to get money to buy someone senior, because what he wanted was someone senior, and even someone like Harry Maguire, who may or may not be the level required, has played a lot of senior games. He's led a defence at Sheffield United. He understands English football. He knows what he's doing. Someone who has that level of experience to play alongside probably Bailly, because Smalling and Jones, who he went back to last season, are both decent players, but neither of them are likely to improve and get to the level that you need if you're going to be a team that wants to rely on its defence. And Mourinho teams tend to rely on their defence because they tend to look to win tight games. So I was pleased as a United supporter and as a football writer, I could see why he decided at the beginning of the season he was going to go with Bailly and Lindelof, because those guys need a run. They need a run playing together to see if actually they've got what it takes. I don't think anyone quite expected the level of awfulness that we got yesterday, but the problem with Bailly is that he panics, and we saw that even before the goal went in, that he has some raw materials. He's fast, he's strong, he's good in the tackle, he's also quite good on the ball, but he's rash, and you only grow out of that rashness with games. The problem is when you play for Manchester United, it's very hard to have those games very often. But it's also quite rare that you will have two young centre-backs playing together, learning together. So I do see why Wood would refuse Mourinho the money, because he probably thinks he's going to have to sack him, or he's going to resign at some point. Probably wouldn't mind if he did. So if he's going to give him a whole stack of money to waste on someone the next guy might not want, that's a problem. I can also see that if you're the money man, you're saying, I've already given you 70 million quid for defenders. Why do you want money for another one? I think there's a fair answer to that if you look at transfers in general, 50% hit rate is quite good. Yeah, I bought these blokes. I thought they were good. They're not ready. My mistake. But what we're going to do about it? It doesn't really make sense to keep the manager and not give him money that he says he needs. And now we're seeing that Mourinho knows more about the defenders that United need than Ed Woodward, which again, like the length of time it's taken me to give this long, meandering answer tells you quite what an absolute mess it is.
It's the mess is kind of summed up by Jose's reaction yesterday. I think his media dealings is kind of like the curious case of Benjamin Button, where it's like getting more and more childish with every passing week. We're borderline on the point where he just starts mumbling utterances that are completely incomprehensible at this point. Like yesterday he said, I'm no longer going to talk unless I'm happy, you know, which is like, I'm not talking to you anymore because I don't like you, you're not my friend, sort of thing. And it's actually getting entertaining again, Daniel. Like last year we were kind of bored with how miserable he was, but he's got so miserable now where, you know, I'm starting to enjoy what Jose Mourinho has to say. It is just so utterly stupid in some of his dealings he did yesterday.
I'm looking forward to his dirty protest on Woodward's boardroom chair. But it's weird, like he's since the whole transfer ruckus, he's actually looked quite good. Like he's kind of gone back to the Mourinho, like hitting out at people he doesn't like in a relatively amusing way, showing a bit of attitude. But the problem is he doesn't seem able to impart that to the players. And for whatever reason, the message isn't getting through. I think that part of it is football has probably changed a bit, and it's quite hard to make people do what you want them to do if they don't think they should be doing it. And Fergie had that force of personality and that ability to change pace depending on the different kinds of individuals that he had. Mourinho doesn't really have that, and I think that there are some players that don't really feel like they need him. Martial wants to leave, clearly, thinks that he'd go somewhere else and be a star. Pogba thinks he already is a star, maybe he is a star, thinks he can go somewhere else and be a star. And then in amongst that, you've got other players who were never good enough or are past it. So they'll try, and who he doesn't particularly like Mata, for example. He doesn't really want Mata on the right wing. He doesn't have a right winger. He doesn't want Young at fullback, really. He doesn't have a fullback.
We were going to talk a bit more detail about Sarri a couple of weeks ago at Chelsea, and we didn't really get an opportunity to tease it out. But if you compare with what Sarri's doing, okay, granted it's a very, very small sample size, but he seems to have been able to get players he wanted to leave on side and playing for him. Again, caveat, very, very early on in the season, but players don't want to leave. Willian's going to stay. Eden Hazard says he's going to stay. If a manager come in who could galvanise the Manchester United squad, the squad's not a bad squad. Maybe they do need a new centre-back, but maybe somebody can come in and get better play from some of the centre-backs that are on the roster at the moment, or build a defensive system which doesn't leave the defenders so exposed. So maybe Mourinho is just the problem.
You could play Smalling and Jones, and you know what you're going to get. Like you have an okay defence. Like Smalling and Jones are Premier League level players, and they'll sometimes be really good. They shut Spurs out brilliantly in the cup semi-final. And any manager could play those. Mourinho could play those, and you might not get the errors that you got yesterday. But I understand why he played Jones and why he played Bailly and Lindelof, because he's looking to build something slightly better than that. You've got these younger players who maybe can become better players than Jones and Smalling, but they're not better players than Jones and Smalling now. If you look at Surrey, I mean, I wasn't impressed with Chelsea's defending against Arsenal, so I don't think it's quite as straightforward as that. And they also played Arsenal at a very good time when Arsenal are trying to learn how to play under a new manager as well. Chelsea still threw away a 2-goal lead. As for persuading the players to stay, it's kind of hard to comment specifically because we don't really know what was available to Hazard. So what Real Madrid may have been available, Barcelona may have been available, but we're not really sure. But what he does have is he has a midfield that looks like it's going to work. He has Jorginho, he already had Kante, and he's bought Kovacic. That looks like a good three. I say that, but then I was talking before the game in the press room. I was saying very cleverly, I thought, that Fred, Pogba, and Pereira to me look like a really good midfield because you've got three players. Each of them can play all the midfield roles. They can all go forward. Pereira used to be a number 10. They can pass from the back. They can take the ball under pressure. They can run with the ball. And the problem is that for whatever reason, it's not working. And as I said earlier that I didn't really feel that necessarily any other manager would have got that United squad to second last season. I also think on the other side, it's fair to say that almost any manager in world football would be getting better football out of these attacking players. And for whatever reason, Mourinho isn't able to do that. There's no cohesion. There's no partnerships on the pitch. When you see a good attacking team, you'll see not just the team attacking as a whole, but you'll see understanding between the players. You'll see the players always play on the flank together, the left back and the left winger, understanding what each other's going to do. You'll see two strikers or split strikers making runs that complement the other. You'll see a striker make a run, the midfielder knows where he's going to go. And you see absolutely none of that with United. You see very little interplay. You just see them waiting for a combination between two naturally talented players. And it's very hard to see that precise element changing under Mourinho.
All right, Daniel, we'll leave it there this morning. Thanks very much for joining us.
All right, see you again, guys.
Daniel Harris giving us some thoughts in the aftermath of, well, I mean, it was a bit of a surprise, a 3-2 defeat for Manchester United. I've got to say, I mean, certainly when we were previewing the game on Premier League Friday, which is our brand new Friday afternoon show, which we go through every Premier League game and tell you what's going to happen or not in some cases, there was a general consensus that Man United were out for revenge for what happened last season and they were going to kill Brighton because Brighton aren't going to be that good this year. And then Brighton are suddenly 3-1 up and they're like, oh,
Yeah,
What's the truth?
Chris Hughton really loves coming up against Manchester United. It was very, very odd performance. Great to see Shane Duffy get on the score sheet, by the way. And like, I'd love to know what people think. Was that the worst centre-back performance we've seen from Manchester United? Certainly post Fergie, it has to be right up there. But even in the Premier League era in general, it has to be up there. Like, just horrendous. And like, we did get into that a good bit there. Just the real kind of paradox of this whole thing is that those two lads, Bailly and Lindelof, are both Jose Mourinho signings. But we're in a situation where Ed Woodward has clearly decided that he is going to proceed with this season as Jose Mourinho as first team coach. But I don't quite trust you because you signed those two crap centre-backs. Therefore, I'm not going to give you enough money. And ultimately, if you don't trust your manager, you've got to sack him.
Yeah.
So Woodward has to be blamed for not getting rid of him. But ultimately, Woodward needs to get rid of Jose Mourinho. So maybe there's a full kind of top-level clear-out required. There's the weekend's results, as you can see on screen at the moment.
Yeah, so City, I mean, I wonder, is that like one of the best days in the history of Manchester City where you're beating Huddersfield 6-1, Man United are being beaten at Brighton, and you just know that there's no chance this year that they're going to be realistic contenders against you in the league.
But that's the real thing here.
The season's over, lads.
Manchester United, top four battle. We're talking about that for Manchester United now. When you look at the other performances around the weekend, let's just assume that Manchester City and Liverpool are going to be safe top four, no question about that. Chelsea suddenly have got their act together, and Spurs look really, really good on Saturday as well. Like, if Spurs manage to get into White Hart Lane at some point this season, that doesn't become too much of an issue. I don't see how Manchester United are going to be able to outdo them to the top four. And if the Sarri ball continues the way it's gone, which is going to be a lot of fun, whether or not it's going to yield enough results to get them a top four place, then Manchester United are in huge danger of falling out of the top four. I think that is a realistic prospect. And what happens if you're not in the top four? You don't get a lot of money. And what happens when you don't get a lot of money? Ed Woodward's head is on the block.